Hi, my name is Lee Jasper and you're watching the Alliance for Police Accountability, a new Met Commissioner, what the black communities want. It's an opportunity for communities to ask questions around and to make suggestions about what should be the priorities for the new Commissioner. We did invite the two Metropolitan Chief candidates who are being interviewed on the 20th of June, but they chose not to come. Here's a few selection of people who attended this meeting, and here's what they said.
Jeremy Crook, Chief Executive of Action for Race Equality.
My name is Janette and I'm the Crib Inclusion Project CEO.
My name is Andy George and I am President of the National Black Police Association and also a serving police officer in the Police Service of Northern Ireland.
My name is Jake Ferguson. I'm the founder of Black Men for Change and I'm also a strategic advisor for a new civil rights charity for the UK, the Black Equity Organisation.
My name is Lester Holloway. I'm editor of The Voice newspaper and I'm delighted to be at the Association of Police Accountability events.
So that's where we are. So we thought, you know what, we'll have the meeting anyway. It's the second one. We had the first one in Brixton. We had a great discussion there. We're going to have a great discussion tonight. So I've asked the panel to think about and consider some key questions. And I want to start, if I may, with you. And now, why, and I keep telling people why Andy's important. Not only is he a member of the APA steering group, because Andy was around in Northern Ireland when they had to shut down the Royal Ulster Constabulary because it couldn't not be saved and create the Police Service of Northern Ireland. That history was one in which they came to the conclusion that the reputation of the RUC was so damaged that it needed a new vision of policing and a new vision of inclusive policing. And that, for me, in terms of experience, is worth its weight in gold. How important is it for this Commissioner to accept the reality of institutionalised racism?
For me, it's essential. The whole impact that our members, and again we have over 5,000 members or thereabouts across nearly 50 police forces, law enforcement agencies across the UK, and the Met is obviously has the vast majority of those. Almost half of all black officers are centred in the Metropolitan Police. Everything that happens in London, everything that happens in the Metropolitan Police ripples out from there. It does impact the rest of our membership, which is why I am here as a national president rather than the Met BPA president. The issues that we talk about all the time are not the overt, in-your-face racism. A lot of that has went underground. I think a lot of racism in policing has become more covert, and I think sometimes policing has got better with their PR, which is probably the crux of what the problem is a lot of the time. Rather than tackling those root causes of what the issues are, rather admitting that the issues are not one or two bad apples. It's about the fact that the institution teaches people to think and behave in a certain way. The lack of representation throughout the police service, the lack of representation particularly at the top, means that decision making does not always take into account our members, our community's views, and that's an institutional issue. It's in the systems, it's in the processes. Again, the institutional racism label, it's something that policing has probably spent more time trying to deny than actually look at what the community are telling us, and whether policing agrees that that's the reality of the situation or not. The community's perspective is their reality, and that's where policing must start to actually build those bridges. As Lee said, in Northern Ireland we had to go through that process, and again I have the unique position. I was the second last RUC squad. I was proud to join that service, and I, being from a majority community, I was one of the 92% from a Protestant background in Northern Ireland that joined that service. So I went into it with a lot of bias, a lot of cultural issues. All of my friends, dads, aunties, uncles were police officers. I see the police very much as this powerful force standing between communities, keeping everybody safe. Whenever we went through our reckoning, we had our uniform change, our name change, because the gap between the police in Northern Ireland and certain sections of the community grew so far that we became legitimate targets for murder. And that continued. We lost over 300 officers in 30 years of the Troubles. In the last 20 years, we've lost around 2 officers, which is too many, but in comparison to over 300, we also police with half the numbers of police officers that we do. So that one we did back in 1999, 13,500 down to 7,000. So that almost embracing what the community are telling you and responding I think has a real impact on how you actually tackle crime, how you prevent harm in communities as well, and we need to work with the community. So these issues are the root of the problem, and that's where we need to focus our attention.
So as a serving officer, many years experience with Northern Ireland under UQ Belt, you think it's absolutely critical that the new commissioner, whoever they are, accepts from day one, this is the problem. We've got institutionalised racism and we're going to need to tackle that. How important is accepting the reality of institutionalised racism for the new commissioner?
Yeah, I think it's really key, and one reason I think it's really important is because an acceptance would show a willingness to move beyond the emotional reaction that a lot of people have to the word racist or racism, and a willingness to deal with the substantive issue of racism itself. So it would show a shift in perspective from the discomfort that people who are on one end of it to the perspective of those who are on the receiving end instead. What I always say to people is I think the key is to look at the actual definition of institutional racism, and not just those words, but to read the entire chapter 3 of the Stephen Lawrence Inquiry Report, and look at the evidence that was considered by Lord Macpherson when he wrote that report. The key evidence about institutional racism came from a black police officer. It came from Paul Wilson, who was the head of the Metropolitan Police Association at the time. And what he said was extremely nuanced, and it was very self-aware. And he said that even he fell short of that definition. That as a black police officer serving in the Metropolitan Police, if he followed the rules, if he did everything by the book, he still did things that exacerbated racial disparity. He still did things that made experiences of the black people that he came across worse. He knew that the culture, the institution, the system that he was working in was geared towards those outcomes, and that he wasn't adequately resourced to deal with those. So actually that's where the evidence for that came. He didn't separate himself from others. So this idea that the definition of institutional racism means leaving officers behind, means labelling individuals as racist, is inherently flawed. It shows a lack of understanding of the emanation of the term, a lack of understanding of the definition, a lack of understanding of the evidence that contributed towards it. And that's why I think it's really important for the new commissioner to come out and say, I've read the report, I've considered what it means. It talks about processes, it talks about outcomes, it talks about the fact that we need to do better as an organisation, which means supporting officers better to speak about racism, to understand racism and to challenge racism, so that they can get on with the substantive aspects of their roles without contributing towards the wider racism that we see in society. So it's a nuanced thing, actually. It's not about labelling individuals as racist, which is very often where that conversation stops. And seeing that in senior leadership, seeing that in such an important police force, you know, that police is 55% of the black population in England and Wales, would be a wonderful thing to see.
Well, you heard it here from Abby, institutionalised racism. It looks like we're going to have a consensus here, isn't that strange? A consensus on institutionalised racism.
Well, I think that it's a crucial starting point because you need to accept, or the police commissioners need to accept, that there is institutional racism in order to design policies and solutions and to even engage with the black community, in all of those regards. We've just had a Met Commissioner in Cresida who denied that her force was institutionally racist, which really took us back to a pre-Stephen Lawrence inquiry era. And we have a Chief Constable in Greater Manchester, Stephen Watson, who is also a denier of institutional racism in the force. So that has to be the starting point. But for me, at The Voice, we're coming up to our 40th anniversary as a newspaper, and I've been looking back at a lot of the back issues over those 4 decades, and the amount of articles and front pages that our newspaper has done over those 40 years on policing is absolutely staggering. Looking at absolute frustration with past Met commissioners like Paul Condon, later Lord Condon, looking at various different cases like Colin Roach, who was shot by police. It goes on and on and on. And the other story that keeps coming up in the Voice newspaper is the police saying sorry for this. And again, looking at it in that context, it feels like the stories are absolutely meaningless, and that the experience is no different. In fact, in some ways, it's worse. At the time of the Stephen Lawrence inquiry, the first inquiry, black people were 3 times more likely to be stopped and searched in London. Now it's 9 times more likely to be stopped and searched, 7 times nationally. That is an indication that things really are going backwards. And now, of course, we've got new police powers in terms of the abolition of reasonable suspicion, which is basically the sus laws Mark II. So we are really at a crucial juncture where we do need to have those discussions about what to do. But I think also the new Met Commissioner needs to know, as well as accept those issues of racism, needs to actually be focused on actually restoring the trust and confidence of the community, which is not about engaging in a new glossy advertising campaign for recruitment with smiling African, Caribbean and Asian faces. It's not about talking about more training, because we've been there before as well. I used to be a late police trainer back in the day. It's not about those things. It's actually about bearing down on racial disparities, on stop and search in other areas, tasering. But it is also, quite frankly, about rooting out racist police officers, being grasping the nettle. And I want to see sackings, because we know there's a huge problem. And I want to see evidence of those police being identified and chucked out of the force. Until we actually, until we do that, then we're going to continue to go around in the same circles. And in a few years' time, with the next Met Commissioner after the one that's just coming, we're going to be in exactly the same situation. We really need to break that cycle.
I think that's absolutely right.
Oh, yes, institutionalised racism is a priority, but how can you prove somebody is racist? That's what I'd like to ask everybody out there. How can you actually prove someone's racist? You can actually go into a room and mask yourself off and just carry on that you're not racist, you're all about community, you're all about love, harmony, but your heart is, because don't forget, that is something that's deep inside you. You're not going to be able to dig that out. If they find anything around race, being racist, they sack them. Not just say to you, you can work on the desk. Like with the Rashawn Charles murder, that should have been they should have used that as a way of, to say, look, we are standing up. This is what this is. This is racist, what they've done to this young person. It was, and the way they dealt with it and everything else was racist. And I think we've not got any further. We haven't got any further, and that's my opinion. When we're all talking, it's my opinion, we've not got no further. We've done a meeting yesterday, and I was talking at the meeting yesterday, and you only think, oh yeah, they go again. But we're not going to get nowhere with it. What you have to do, you have to dig in deep. The only person that actually really stood up, I actually saw stand up, and that was years ago, and he's sitting over there, was Leroy Logan, right? Around, like black policing and everything else, and really tried to make a change. I'm just speaking on Hackney, that's tried to make a change. Yeah, and it's all the training that the police do. They say that they're about training, but like I said, you can go into a service and you can train somebody and think that you're making an impact in the mind, but racism is deep. You know what I mean? It's inbred racism, it's very, very deep. And I don't know, personally myself, I don't know how you're going to be able to fish out that, but if the commissioner comes in and tries to do that, then that'd be a way forward. It's in depth.
And of course, if I may, Charlotte Q is in this borough.
Yeah.
And we've just had a very similar case in Brixton, where a child's underwear was cut off while she was menstruating, and she was strip searched in school. And then we had another incident outside in Stockwell, where a young Muslim girl was brutally treated. Over 400 people came out for that community meeting last week. But Child Q has elicited the same responses here locally, hasn't it?
Yeah, it has. Yeah, definitely it has.
And this has become a key issue for the local police and the local community.
Well, it did, the work they did to actually bridge the gap between police and the community was coming together, and just that child youth thing has made it, they've got light years ahead to work now at the moment with young people and the community to be able to, to build that small gap that they've closed a little bit. Personally myself, I think that the police see black people, right? When, don't forget, and this is deeper than just police, this is just all over, right? When a black person talks, why are you shouting? Well, I'm not shouting, you're shouting. And in the end you try to explain that you're not shouting, so you end up getting louder and louder and louder. Yeah, right? When if a black person walks with their hands in their pocket, why you got your hands in your pocket? Because I feel like having my hands in pocket, these are things that young people say, they're not adult. Why you got your hands in pocket? I feel like I want to keep my hands in pocket, but I want to know what's in your pocket. But if it was the other way around, if another person speaks, then you know Afro-Caribbean people in the Caribbean, we talk loud, that's just us. But we're always accused of being shouting. And people have been saying, and aggressive, why are you being aggressive? As soon as we open our mouth, we're aggressive. So these are the things that we need to change, and that's from inside the schools and everywhere, not just police.
You get it from Hackney, Child Q Local. Give her a round of applause.
I'm someone who's been advising the Met Commissioner unpaid for 8 years, every quarter, trying to get them to appreciate that what they're doing, or whatever they're trying to do to build trust and confidence in black communities in London isn't working. And it's not about a majority or a minority of officers who are either racist or not racist. It's about the treatment of black people and the outcomes that we get in London. The elephant in the room is often stop and search, isn't it? Whatever this new commissioner tries to do, if they're stopping 20,000 people a month, most of those are going to be black young people, children and young men. The trauma that that causes, the bad feeling, are you ever going to have a police service that is going to be something that black people want to support, want to be part of, want to make something that's inclusive and relevant to their lives? It's obviously a critical service, a public service where lethal force can be used. People obviously do die as a result of police behaviours and attitudes. We still only have 4% of police officers in London from a black background. It should be near 13%. On every single indicator, the disparity is significant in relation to black people. So the new commissioner, and if it's one of them that I've spent many times talking to, doesn't have the right starting point, you're definitely not going to find the right solutions, are you? We're going to carry on the way we are, year in, year out, with a lack of confidence, a lack of trust, and too many black people not getting to senior jobs, leaving too early, being disciplined, and then obviously in the community, all the negative, very negative outcomes that we are getting, and the use of force. I like the language of the new action plan on race. It talks about zero tolerance to racism. It talks about doing a number of things. It talks about accountability. But what is the level of trust and accountability in a borough like Hackney amongst young black people, amongst the black community generally, and amongst the whole community? Because people can see every day the way that young people are stopped on the street and these terrible cases. I don't know about you, but I get literally upset just either reading the paper on the way home, listening to the news, and just thinking, am I actually wasting my time talking to the police? Should I actually step back? We've talked about defunding the police, not engaging. We do need, in my humble opinion, a police service in this country. Obviously, we need a police service. It's got to be better. It's got to be different. But we need some more rigorous, aggressive leadership that really does kind of drill down on racism and gets better outcomes. We've been talking to the police and helping the training for probably 30 odd years. I'm only 5 years behind Lee in that respect. But I've seen and heard lots of good black and brown people from the community inform the training. And it's just tokenistic, really, if you're not going to take the action that we say and get rid of officers that say racist things, do racist things, support racist things. You've got to have a service where people are confident to speak up. My final point is, it has to be in the round, doesn't it? we do have to look at the misogyny,
Yeah.
the sexism, the racism in the round. But at least if they have a race action plan, it's got to be something that we believe in and that they are held accountable to at local level and obviously at the commissioner and mayor level.
I think that what we do understand as a community is that warm words are easy to give. And we can all write wonderfully, prosaic statements about our commitment and what we're going to do. But delivering that in action, that's a whole different political ballgame. I'm going to come now to the audience and ask questions.
My question is a simple one. Does the panel and yourself, Lee, think that there is an inherent issue with the Home Office appointing the Met Commissioner, as opposed to the people of London somehow voting or having their say in who we want?
I definitely think the majority stake should be Londoners and our elected mayor in terms of choosing the commissioner. I appreciate that Met's got particular national responsibilities and it's the biggest force and the most crucial force, but the balance of power and decision making I think should be in London.
I think it's a really interesting point, especially from the perspective of black communities. The majority of people of black heritage live in London, and so in other areas, in the other 42 areas, you directly elect your police and crime commissioner, and then that police and crime commissioner selects the chief constable. Obviously, it's more complex than that. I've given a very kind of simplified version of that, but the effect of the Met having those national portfolios means that effectively we are deprived in London of having an elected official that has that direct say in the same way that the other elected officials do. Arguably, of course, the Home Secretary is an MP who is elected, but you don't directly vote for a cabinet minister, do you? The cabinet is chosen by the PM. So it is an interesting situation, especially when you think about how liberal London is compared to other parts of the country. Like, how do we come up with a system that better reflects the values that Londoners have to make sure that that is reflected in the person that runs the police force?
I thought I knew Cresida Dick. And I actually celebrated her appointment in 2017, even though I did put aside Stockport and John Sean Menendez.
That's a big one, sir.
I know, but I was willing to give her the benefit of the doubt. But when you see someone was in denial, and both Tariq and I worked with her from McPherson, the real irony is that she was working to help roll out the McPherson recommendations in '99. That's the real irony. So it seems she was either disingenuous, at least, or decisive was in the work she was doing, because 20 years later, she's well into the organisation, she's in total denial, and I think she's set back policing decades without changing. I'm sure behind the scenes she's still influencing. She worked very closely with Priti Patel, so I'm sure there are residual here. I think it's definitely got to be people cannot put the pressure on the commissioner, and will be he, the senior management team, to ensure that we're not going to be taken for fools, and we're not being told everything is cool. And that's why, even in retirement, I'm still active in the area. I call it public service, and similar to policing. And I will maintain that to ensure that we all work together to let them understand that they cannot think we're just going to accept anything.
I've been away for about 10 years, and I just want to make 3 or 4 points, if I may, very quickly around this. The first thing is, getting around the world, working in South Asia, in the Middle East, in the US, various other places, there is a real problem in the public services here, in the sense that people are promoted based on whether they fit in or not based on competence. And this is a serious issue, and how anybody, and I'd be interested in the panel, how anybody can get through this, because it remains a challenge. Because when I was here, I look at the chief officers across public services, actually it's gone worse, and I think somebody made that point. The second point is that if I was making or giving some advice to prospective commissioners of the police, I would just make a couple of points. Firstly, the complexity of what they're dealing with in relation to communities and challenges around harm and criminal justice is very, very significant. And that relates to is that they're going to have to bring very early on, as the panel has said, some thought leadership to this. And define very quickly what the style of policing is going to be in this capital. Very quickly. You know, in US it's disorder management, fill the prisons. You know, here we always worked on prevention. You go to Scandinavian countries, it's much more, they see crime as a social problem, etc. You know, so you're going to have to define. Secondly, right, they're going to have an emotional attachment. One of the things about role models is in public sectors at the highest levels, and we tried very, very hard, and there are others, Mike Fuller, there's, Ron Hope was there, Paul Wilson, as we mentioned, but unless there is an emotional attachment to the communities, you ain't going to engage. You're going to superficially engage. So there will need to be an emotional attachment, serious emotional attachment, and effectively that then becomes visible to everybody else. And finally, there is a leadership aspect, right? The leadership in relation to externally, and please, you know, you can't be a good leader unless you measure what you're doing. And there was a time when there were serious, not our friends, IAGs, and actually you've been a part of that, and many others have, who used to demand statistics from us for service delivery. How many tickets, how many arrests? I mean, we talk about stop and search, but my God, there is about 15 different categories. And I can assure you, and I'm not part of it, and haven't been, there would be disproportionality, as we mentioned, in every one of them. Right? So there is this service the aspect of in terms of how you engage and how you, and second, internally, it's going to be a massive change management exercise. We do not actually want politicians in uniform. What you want is to have serious, professional leaders who engage internally in intrusive leadership and are totally transparent externally. Thank you for listening to me. But as I said, I'm not interested in
You know, it's amazing when we can get the kind of eclectic mix that we've got in this room together today. Very former senior officers, current senior officers, members of the black community, all in consensus around what the issue is, the crisis, and what now needs